the moment Rebecca Carter stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Belmont, Wyoming Territory, in the summer of 1878. She knew her carefully constructed lies were about to unravel like a poorly stitched hem. She clutched her worn leather satchel against her chest as the late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and her eyes searched the weathered faces of the men gathered near the general store. Her hands trembled despite the heat, and she could feel perspiration gathering at her temples beneath her travel-stained bonnet. The letter in her pocket, the one she had written to Yates Emerson claiming to be an experienced ranch woman with knowledge of livestock and cooking for large crews, suddenly felt as heavy as a branding iron. The truth was far less impressive. Rebecca had grown up in a Philadelphia boarding house, the daughter of a seamstress who had died of influenza 3 years prior. Her father, a gambler who had disappeared when she was 7, had left them with nothing but debts and broken promises. After her mother's death, Rebecca had worked in a textile factory until the conditions and the foreman's wandering hands became unbearable. The mail-order bride advertisement had seemed like her only escape from a life that was slowly suffocating her. A tall man separated himself from the group near the hitching post, and Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. He was easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against his chambray work shirt. His hat was pulled low, casting shadows across a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. As he approached, she could see eyes the color of storm clouds assessing her with an intensity that made her want to flee back onto the stagecoach. "Miss Carter." His voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling in a creek bed. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Emerson," he nodded once, reaching for her satchel. "Let me take that. You have other luggage." "No, this is all." The admission made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Everything she owned in the world fit into one small bag. Yates's expression didn't change, but she thought she saw something flicker in those gray eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or pity. She wasn't sure which would be worse. "The wagon's this way." He turned and started walking, clearly expecting her to follow. Rebecca hurried after him, her skirts gathering dust with each step. The main street of Belmont was wider than she'd expected, lined with false-fronted buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support. A saloon, a dry goods store, a blacksmith's forge with its distinctive metallic ringing, and what appeared to be a small church at the far end of town. It was larger than she'd imagined, but still felt impossibly remote compared to Philadelphia's crowded streets. The wagon was simple but well-maintained, pulled by 2 sturdy horses that shifted their weight as Yates loaded her satchel into the back. He offered her his hand to help her onto the bench seat, and when her fingers touched his calloused palm, she felt an unexpected jolt of something she couldn't quite name. As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, Rebecca forced herself to speak. "How far is your ranch?" "About 8 miles northwest. We'll be there before dark." He clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward at a steady pace. They rode in silence for several minutes, leaving the town behind as the landscape opened up into rolling prairie dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of cottonwood trees. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding patches of snow even in summer. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way that made Rebecca's heart ache with both wonder and fear. "I should tell you," Yates said suddenly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "The ranch isn't fancy. It's just me and my foreman Cal and 2 ranch hands. We run about 300 head of cattle. The house is small, 2 bedrooms, a main room, and a kitchen." "That sounds fine," Rebecca said, though her stomach was twisting itself into knots. 2 bedrooms. That meant he expected her to share his room immediately, as was his right as her husband. They would be married within days, she assumed, and then she would be expected to fulfill all the duties of a wife. I figured we'd have the wedding in 3 weeks, Yates continued, as if reading her thoughts. That'll give you time to settle in, get to know the place. You'll take the second bedroom until then. It's not proper otherwise. Relief flooded through her so suddenly she felt lightheaded. That's very considerate. My mother raised me to respect women, he said simply. Even if things are done differently out here than back east, some rules still matter. Your mother sounds like a fine woman. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She was. Died 6 years ago, cholera outbreak that swept through these parts in '72. I'm sorry. They fell silent again, but it felt less oppressive now, more companionable. Rebecca studied her future husband from the corner of her eye. His hands on the reins were steady and confident, his posture relaxed despite the tension she sensed coiled beneath his calm exterior. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, his features too rugged and weathered for that, but there was something compelling about him nonetheless. Something solid and dependable that called to the part of her that had been adrift for so long. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when they finally turned onto a narrow track that led through a stand of trees and emerged into a small valley. The ranch house sat nestled against a hillside, a modest wooden structure with a covered porch and stone chimney. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance, their forms silhouetted against the darkening sky. "It's lovely," Rebecca said, and meant it. There was something peaceful about the setting, something that spoke of home in a way she hadn't felt in years. Yates pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and set the brake. "I'll show you around inside. The men already ate, but I saved you some supper." As he helped her down from the wagon, a man emerged from the barn. He was older than Yates, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and a face like worn leather. He nodded to Rebecca with something approaching suspicion in his weathered eyes. "Cal, this is Miss Carter." "Rebecca, my foreman, Cal Morrison." "Madam," Cal said, touching the brim of his hat. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Morrison." "Just Cal is fine." He turned to Yates. "That heifer I was worried about dropped her calf about an hour ago, both doing fine." "Good. I'll check on them after I get Miss Carter settled." Cal nodded again and disappeared back into the barn, leaving them alone in the gathering dusk. Yates retrieved her satchel and led her up the porch steps. The boards creaked under their weight, and Rebecca noticed a rocking chair in one corner, its wood smoothed by years of use. Inside, the house was simple but clean. The main room held a stone fireplace, a sofa that had seen better days, a rough-hewn table with 4 chairs, and shelves lined with books. Rebecca was surprised by the books, dozens of them, their spines worn from reading. Through one doorway she could see the kitchen, and 2 closed doors presumably led to the bedrooms. "Your room is here," Yates said, opening the door on the left. "It was my mother's. Still has her furniture." The room was small but welcoming, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a dresser with a mirror and a washstand. A window looked out toward the mountains, and someone had placed wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. "It's perfect," Rebecca said softly. "Thank you." Yates set her satchel on the bed. "I'll warm up your supper. Take your time getting settled." He left, closing the door behind him, and Rebecca sank onto the bed with a shaky exhale. The mattress was more comfortable than she'd expected, and the quilt smelled faintly of lavender. She removed her bonnet and smoothed her dark hair, catching her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired and dusty, her brown eyes too large in her pale face. At 22, she sometimes felt ancient, worn down by years of struggling just to survive. But here, in this simple room with its view of endless sky, she felt something else stirring. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the beginning of it. She washed her face and hands in the basin, then made her way to the kitchen. Yates stood at the stove, ladling stew into a bowl. The kitchen was orderly, with pots hanging from hooks and herbs drying near the window. A loaf of bread sat on the counter, and he cut several thick slices to accompany the stew. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the small table. "It's just beef stew, nothing fancy." Rebecca sat and took the bowl he offered. The stew was hot and savory, rich with vegetables and tender chunks of meat. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she took the first bite. "This is delicious," she said. "My mother's recipe. One of the few things I can make that's actually edible." He poured her a cup of coffee and sat across from her, his own cup in hand. "I should be honest with you, Rebecca. I'm not much of a cook. I can manage the basics, but you said in your letter you had experience cooking for ranch crews." Guilt twisted in her stomach, souring the taste of the stew. This was the moment. She could continue the lie, pretend to have skills she didn't possess, and likely create disaster after disaster until he sent her back to Philadelphia in disgrace. Or she could tell him the truth now and face the consequences. Rebecca set down her spoon, her hands knotting together in her lap. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Yates, I need to tell you something. I need to be honest with you before this goes any further." He watched her steadily, those gray eyes revealing nothing. "All right. I lied in my letters. Not about everything, but about important things." The words came out in a rush now, tumbling over each other in her urgency to confess. "I'm not an experienced ranch woman. I've never cooked for a crew. I've never even been on a ranch before today. I grew up in Philadelphia, in a boarding house. My mother was a seamstress, and I worked in a textile factory before I answered your advertisement." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Yates didn't move, didn't blink, just watched her with that same steady gaze that made her feel transparent. "I'm sorry," she continued, her voice breaking. "I was desperate and frightened, and I didn't know what else to do. If you want to send me back, I understand. I'll find a way to repay you for the travel expenses somehow. I just couldn't marry you under false pretenses. I couldn't start a life built on lies." More silence. Rebecca couldn't bear to look at him anymore, so she stared at her hands instead, waiting for his anger or disappointment. Waiting for him to stand up and tell her to pack her things. Instead, she heard him let out a long breath. "Well, that's something I didn't expect." "I'm sorry," she repeated, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "Look at me, Rebecca." She forced herself to meet his gaze, bracing for what she would see there. But instead of anger, she found something that looked almost like amusement. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "Took courage to tell me the truth. You're not angry." "Oh, I'm not pleased about the deception," he admitted. "But I understand desperation. I know what it's like to feel like you're out of options." He took a sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "Can you learn? Are you willing to work hard?" "Yes," Rebecca said immediately. "I'm a fast learner, and I'm not afraid of hard work. I just don't have experience with ranch life specifically." "Then we'll teach you. Cal's been after me to hire someone to help with the cooking anyway, especially during Roundup when we bring on extra hands. You can start with simple meals and work your way up." He paused, studying her face. "What else did you lie about?" Rebecca's cheeks burned. "I exaggerated my skills with livestock. I've never actually worked with animals beyond the stray cats that lived around the boarding house." "Can you ride a horse?" "No." "Milk a cow?" "No." "Churn butter, preserve vegetables, mend harnesses?" "No to all of that," Rebecca admitted miserably. "I can sew, though. I learned from my mother. I can make clothes and mend torn fabric and do embroidery." Yates nodded slowly. "That's useful. We go through work shirts like water around here, and I've been meaning to get new curtains for years." He stood and refilled his coffee cup, then leaned against the counter. "Here's what I'm thinking. We still get married in 3 weeks like planned. Between now and then, you learn everything you can about running a ranch household. Cal and I will teach you. If at the end of 3 weeks you decide this life isn't for you, I'll give you enough money for passage back to Philadelphia and enough to get yourself established somewhere." No hard feelings. Rebecca stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would do that? Even after I lied to you, you told me the truth when you didn't have to. That counts for something." His expression softened slightly. "I know what it's like to be trapped, Rebecca. My father was a hard man, mean when he drank, which was often. My mother stayed because she had nowhere else to go. I swore when I was old enough that I'd never trap anyone like that. So yes, if you want out at the end of 3 weeks, you'll have a way out." The tears Rebecca had been holding back finally spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't let you down. I promise I'll work as hard as I can. I believe you." He pushed away from the counter. "Finish your supper and get some rest. Morning comes early around here." "We start before dawn." Rebecca nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. As Yates moved toward the door, she called out, "Yates!" He turned back. "Why did you place the advertisement? For a mail-order bride, I mean. You seem perfectly capable of managing on your own." A shadow crossed his face. "This ranch was my parents' dream. My mother always said it needed a family to make it whole. She made me promise before she died that I wouldn't let the dream die with her. I'm 31 years old, and there aren't exactly a lot of unmarried women in Belmont. Placing that advertisement seemed like the practical solution." "That's a good reason," Rebecca said softly. "Get some rest," he repeated, and left her alone in the kitchen. Rebecca finished her stew slowly, thinking about everything that had happened. She had expected judgment and anger, but instead found understanding and a second chance. As she washed her dishes in the basin, she looked out the window at the star-filled sky. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light, more stars than she had ever seen in Philadelphia, where the city lights dimmed the night sky. Maybe, she thought, just maybe this could work. The next morning, Rebecca woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the low murmur of male voices outside. The sky through her window was just beginning to lighten, that deep blue-gray that precedes sunrise. She dressed quickly in her plainest dress, a brown calico that had seen better days, and tied her hair back in a simple braid. When she emerged from her room, she found Yates already in the kitchen, stirring a pot of something that smelled like coffee but looked far too thick. "Morning," he said. "Hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you. What are you making?" "Attempting to make oatmeal. It's not going great." He looked at the pot with something approaching frustration. "It's either too watery or turns into cement. I can't seem to find the middle ground." Rebecca moved to his side and peered into the pot. The oatmeal was indeed very thick, starting to stick to the bottom. "May I?" He stepped aside gratefully, and she took the spoon. She added water slowly, stirring constantly, and adjusted the heat. Within a few minutes, the consistency improved to something actually edible. "How did you do that?" Yates asked, watching with genuine interest. "I used to make oatmeal at the boarding house sometimes. The trick is to keep stirring and add the water gradually." She glanced at him. "I may not know much about ranch cooking, but I did learn some basics." "That's more than I can say." He set out bowls and spoons. "Cal and the boys usually eat in the bunkhouse, but I figured today you could cook for just us while you're getting your bearings." They ate breakfast together as the sun rose, painting the mountains pink and gold. Yates explained the daily routine of the ranch, the cycles of work that changed with the seasons. Right now, in midsummer, they were focused on moving cattle to higher pastures, maintaining fences and preparing for the fall roundup. "I'll have Cal take you around today, show you where everything is," Yates said. "The chickens need feeding and the eggs need collecting. We have 2 milk cows, Clara and Belle. Cal will show you how to milk them. Then maybe you can practice some simple cooking. Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread to start." "I can do that," Rebecca said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. After breakfast, she met Cal by the barn. In daylight, she could see he was a weathered man with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which wasn't often. He showed her around the property with efficient practicality, pointing out the chicken coop, the root cellar, the smokehouse, and the various outbuildings. "Yates told me you're new to ranch life," Cal said as he led her to the chicken coop. "That true?" "Yes. I'm sorry if that's disappointing." He shrugged. "Can't say I'm thrilled about eating burnt beans for the next few weeks, but everyone's got to start somewhere. My wife, God rest her soul, she was a terrible cook when we first married. By the time we'd been together 10 years, she could make a feast out of prairie grass and creek water." His expression softened with the memory. "Point is, you'll learn." The chickens were easier to manage than Rebecca expected, though one particularly aggressive hen tried to peck her hand when she reached for the eggs. Cal showed her how to scatter the feed and collect the eggs without getting attacked, and by the end, she had a basket of nearly 2 dozen eggs. Milking the cows was another matter entirely. Clara, the older of the 2 cows, seemed to sense Rebecca's inexperience and kept shifting her weight, nearly knocking over the bucket multiple times. Cal demonstrated the technique, his gnarled hands surprisingly gentle as he showed her the rhythm of pulling and squeezing. "You've got to be firm but not rough," he explained. "They can tell if you're nervous." "I am nervous," Rebecca admitted. "Then pretend you're not." Animals respond to confidence. It took her nearly an hour to milk both cows, and her hands ached by the time she finished, but she managed to fill 2 buckets without getting kicked or spilling too much. Cal nodded his approval. "Not bad for a first try. You'll build up the strength in your hands." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of new experiences. Cal showed her the root cellar where they stored potatoes, onions, and other vegetables. He explained how they preserved meat in the smokehouse and stored grain in sealed barrels to keep out mice. Everything was organized and practical, designed for survival in a place where the nearest town was 8 miles away. By midday, Rebecca was exhausted but determined to master the cooking. She made a pot of beans following Cal's terse instructions, seasoning them with salt pork and onions. The cornbread was trickier, and her first attempt came out slightly burned on the bottom, but the second batch was better. When Yates and the ranch hands came in for dinner, they ate without complaint, though Rebecca noticed Yates discreetly pushed aside the burnt edges of his cornbread. She wanted to sink through the floor with embarrassment, but he caught her eye and gave her an encouraging nod. That afternoon, Yates took over her education. He brought out a gentle mare named Daisy and taught Rebecca the basics of riding. She fell off twice, landing hard in the dirt both times, but Yates was patient, showing her how to sit properly, how to hold the reins, how to communicate with the horse through subtle pressure from her legs and shift of her weight. "You're doing fine," he said after her third attempt, when she managed to trot around the corral without falling. "Most people don't stay on as long as you did the first time." "I think Daisy is just very forgiving," Rebecca said, patting the mare's neck. "That helps," he agreed with a slight smile. It was the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. The days fell into a pattern. Rebecca rose before dawn to help with breakfast, though Yates still handled most of the cooking at that hour. She collected eggs, milked the cows with increasing competence, and spent hours practicing basic cooking skills under Cal's gruff supervision. In the afternoons, Yates taught her to ride, slowly building her confidence and ability. She learned to read the sky for signs of weather, to identify different plants and which ones were edible, to recognize the various calls of birds that inhabited the ranch. She learned that ranch life was hard work, but also had its own rhythms and satisfactions. The ache in her muscles at the end of each day felt earned, honest in a way her factory work never had. A week into her stay, Rebecca was in the kitchen kneading dough for bread when she heard raised voices outside. She looked out the window to see Yates and Cal standing with 3 men she didn't recognize. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in Yates's posture. She wiped flour from her hands and moved closer to the open window, not quite eavesdropping but unable to help overhearing. "I'm telling you, Emerson, we've got cattle missing," one of the strangers was saying. He was a large man with a thick mustache and an expensive-looking hat. "Nearly 20 head gone from the north pasture, found tracks leading this direction. And you think I took them?" Yates's voice was cold, controlled. "I'm not accusing anyone yet, just following the tracks. Those tracks could have been made by anyone driving cattle this direction. Doesn't mean they ended up on my land." Yates crossed his arms. "You're welcome to look around, Dutch, but you won't find your cattle here." The man called Dutch nodded slowly. "I'll take you up on that. Boys, let's have a look around." Rebecca watched as the men spread out, checking the barn and various pastures. Her stomach was tied in knots. She didn't know much about ranching, but she understood that cattle rustling was a serious accusation in this part of the country. Men had been hanged for less. Cal appeared at the kitchen door. "Best stay inside, miss. This could get ugly." "Did Yates take those cattle?" "Course not. Yates is the most honest man I know, but Dutch Vernon owns the biggest spread in the county, and he's got it in his head that smaller ranchers are stealing from him." Cal's expression was grim. Been tensions building for a while now. An hour later, the Vernon men left without finding anything, but the atmosphere on the ranch remained tense. At supper, Yates was quieter than usual, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. "Is there going to be trouble?" Rebecca asked softly when Cal and the hands had left. "Maybe. Probably." Yates pushed his food around his plate. "Vernon's been trying to buy out the smaller ranches for years, wants to control the whole valley. Some folks think he's behind the cattle thefts, rustling his own stock and blaming us so he can drive us out or worse. That's horrible. That's reality out here. Laws thin on the ground and men like Vernon make their own rules." He looked at her directly. "This might be a good time to mention that ranch life isn't always peaceful. There are risks, dangers. If you decide you don't want to be part of this, I'd understand." Rebecca thought about his words carefully. She could feel the weight of the decision before her. This was her chance to back out, to return to the relative safety of city life, even if that meant the factory and its wandering foreman. "I'm afraid," she admitted finally. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't, but I'm not going anywhere." Something shifted in Yates's expression, a softening around his eyes. "Fear's a natural thing. Nothing wrong with being afraid." "I've been afraid most of my life," Rebecca said quietly. "Afraid of my father's gambling debts catching up to us. Afraid of starving after my mother died. Afraid of the foreman at the factory who cornered me in the storage room. Afraid of ending up on the streets." She met his gaze steadily. "But being afraid never solved anything. It just kept me trapped." Yates was silent for a long moment, studying her face. Then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch was gentle, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Rebecca, I need you to understand something. Fear ends the moment you trust me." His voice was low and earnest. "I can't promise there won't be danger." I can't promise everything will be easy, but I can promise that I will never let harm come to you if I can prevent it. I will stand between you and anything that threatens you. You have my word on that." The intensity in his eyes made her heart skip. This wasn't just empty reassurance. This was a vow, spoken with the weight of absolute conviction. "I trust you," she said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. Despite knowing him for barely a week, despite all the uncertainty and fear, she trusted him. His hand tightened briefly on hers, then he pulled back, clearing his throat. "Good, that's good." He stood abruptly. "I need to check on the horses. You should get some rest." He left quickly, and Rebecca sat alone in the kitchen, her hand still tingling where he'd touched it. Something had shifted between them in that moment, something deeper than the practical arrangement they'd agreed to. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. The second week brought new challenges. Rebecca was learning to cook more complex meals, though her biscuits still came out either hard as rocks or soggy in the middle. Yates ate them without complaint, even the worst batches, which somehow made her more determined to improve. Her riding had progressed to the point where Yates trusted her to ride out with him to check on the cattle. She still felt uncertain on horseback, but Daisy was patient with her fumbling, and Rebecca found herself actually enjoying the sensation of moving across the open prairie with the wind in her face. They were riding back to the ranch one afternoon when Yates suddenly reined in his horse, his hand going up in a signal for her to stop. He was staring at something in the distance, his body tense. "What is it?" Rebecca asked quietly. "Smoke. Too much smoke for a cook fire." He turned to her. "Ride back to the ranch, fast as you can. Tell Cal to get the men ready." "What are you going to do?" "Check it out. Could be nothing, could be trouble. Either way, you need to get back. Now." Fear clutched at her chest, but she nodded and turned Daisy back toward home. She urged the mare into a gallop, holding on for dear life as they raced across the prairie. By the time she reached the ranch, her heart was pounding and her hands were shaking. Cal took one look at her face and grabbed his rifle. Within minutes, he and the two ranch hands were mounted and riding in the direction Yates had gone. Rebecca was left alone at the ranch, pacing the porch and watching the horizon for any sign of them. The wait was agonizing. She tried to keep busy, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, starting supper preparations, but her mind kept conjuring terrible scenarios. What if it was Vernon's men? What if there was a gunfight? What if Yates was hurt, or worse, it was nearly sunset when she finally saw riders approaching? She counted them anxiously. 4. All 4 men were returning. Relief flooded through her so strongly her knees went weak. Yates dismounted stiffly, his face streaked with soot. "Grass fire," he said. "Started near the creek. We got it contained before it could spread too far." "Was it an accident?" His expression darkened. "No, someone set it deliberately, found signs of camp nearby and traces of kerosene." Cal spat into the dirt. "Vernon." "We don't know that for sure," Yates said, though his tone suggested he agreed. "Who else would it be?" Cal's face was grim. "This is getting out of hand, Yates. Next time it might not be just grass burning." That night, Yates insisted one of the men keep watch at all times. Rebecca could hear him moving around outside long after she'd gone to bed, checking the perimeter, making sure everything was secure. She finally fell asleep listening to the creak of his boots on the porch boards. She woke sometime in the darkest part of the night to the sound of her door opening. Her heart leaped into her throat, but then she recognized Yates's silhouette in the doorway. "Sorry to wake you," he said quietly. "Just checking all the rooms, making sure everything's secure. It's all right." She sat up, pulling her blanket around her shoulders. "Can't sleep, not yet." He hesitated in the doorway. "You doing okay? I know today was frightening." "I'm fine, just worried about you, about all of this." He was quiet for a moment. "Rebecca, if you want to go back to town, stay at the boarding house there until things settle down. I could arrange that." "No," she said firmly. "I told you I'm not going anywhere." "You're stubborn," he said, but there was warmth in his voice. "So are you." She heard what might have been a soft laugh. "Get some sleep. Morning comes early." But neither of them slept much that night. Rebecca could hear him moving around the house at intervals, vigilant and protective. The sound should have been unsettling, but instead she found it strangely comforting. He had promised to stand between her and danger, and he was keeping that promise. The third week arrived with an unexpected visitor. Rebecca was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard a wagon approaching. She came around front to see a woman climbing down from the driver's seat, moving with the confident ease of someone who had made the journey many times. She was perhaps in her mid-40s, handsome rather than pretty, with auburn hair streaked with gray and sharp green eyes that assessed Rebecca thoroughly. "You must be the mail-order bride," the woman said without preamble. "I'm Martha Simmons. I run the boarding house in town. Rebecca Carter." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Simmons. Just Martha, I'm not one for formality." She looked around the yard. "Yates here, out checking the north pasture. He should be back soon. Good, gives us time to talk." Martha reached into the wagon and pulled out a large basket. "Brought you some things. Figured you might need supplies. Also, I wanted to meet you properly. The whole town's been gossiping about Yates's bride from back east." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. "I hope the gossip isn't too terrible. Just curious, mostly. Yates is well liked around here. People want to make sure he's not being taken advantage of." Martha's gaze was direct but not unkind. "So, are you taking advantage?" The blunt question caught Rebecca off guard. "No, at least I hope not. I'm trying my best to learn everything I need to know." Martha studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You've got an honest face. Come on, let's get this basket inside and you can make us some tea." Over tea in the kitchen, Martha explained that she'd been friends with Yates's mother. Sarah was a fine woman. Deserved better than she got from that husband of hers. She made Yates promise to find someone to share this place with, but I know he's been struggling with it. Not easy trusting someone after growing up the way he did. "He's been very kind to me," Rebecca said. "More than I expected." "That's Sarah's influence. She raised him to be a good man despite his father's example." Martha sipped her tea. "I heard about the trouble with Vernon. Word travels fast in these parts. Is it as bad as it seems? Could be. Vernon's ruthless when he wants something, and he's wanted this valley for years. But Yates is smart and he's got friends." Martha set down her cup. "If you're serious about staying, about marrying him, you should know what you're getting into. It won't be an easy life. Even without Vernon causing trouble, ranch life is hard work, isolation, long winters, and sometimes just the sheer loneliness of it all." "I know," Rebecca said. "Or at least I'm beginning to understand. Do you care for him? Yates, I mean. Or is this just about having a roof over your head?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "At first it was about survival, I won't lie about that. But now it feels like something more. He's a good man, like you said. And when I'm with him, I feel safe for the first time in years. I feel like maybe I could build something real here." Martha's expression softened. "That's a good answer. Better than I expected, frankly." She reached across the table and patted Rebecca's hand. "You'll do fine, I think. Just remember, a marriage out here has to be a partnership. You'll need to be strong enough to stand beside him, not just behind him." They were still talking when Yates returned. He seemed surprised but pleased to see Martha, and the older woman hugged him with obvious affection. "Just checking on you," Martha said. "Making sure you're not getting yourself into too much trouble." "Trying not to," Yates replied. "Though trouble seems to find me anyway lately." Martha's expression grew serious. I heard about the fire. Vernon's not going to stop, not until he gets what he wants or someone stops him. I know, but I'm not selling. This ranch meant everything to my mother. I won't let Vernon or anyone else take it. Stubborn, just like Sarah. Martha shook her head but smiled. Well, I should get back to town before dark. Rebecca, you come visit me anytime you need a break from these rough ranch hands. We can have a proper talk over decent tea. After Martha left, Yates seemed more relaxed than Rebecca had seen him in days. She's a good woman, helped my mother a lot during the hard times. She clearly cares about you, she does, and she's a good judge of character. If she likes you, that's high praise. The implication that Martha did like her made Rebecca's heart lift. She brought supplies and advice, quite a bit of advice actually. That sounds like Martha. Yates smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. She tell you all my embarrassing childhood stories. A few. Apparently you once tried to ride a bull when you were 12, he groaned. I was hoping that story had been forgotten. Broke my arm in 2 places and my pride in about 20. They laughed together, and Rebecca felt the last bit of ice between them melt away. This was what a partnership could be, she thought. Not just division of labor but genuine friendship, shared laughter, the comfort of being understood. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Yates brought up the wedding. Still 3 days away, he said. Are you having second thoughts? No, Rebecca said honestly. Are you? No. But I want to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to. Being married to me won't be easy. There's the situation with Vernon, the isolation of the ranch, the hard work, and there's me. I'm not always easy to live with. I'm used to being alone, doing things my own way. I might not be the most romantic husband. Rebecca turned to look at him. In the fading light, his profile was strong and steady, everything she'd come to rely on in these short weeks. Yates, I don't need romance. I need honesty and respect and someone who won't betray me or abandon me when things get hard. You've already given me more of that than anyone else in my life. He met her gaze, something intense and searching in his eyes. You deserve more than just survival, Rebecca. You deserve to be happy. Then help me be happy. Let me help you be happy. Isn't that what marriage should be? 2 people choosing each other every day and building something together. When did you get so wise? Probably somewhere between burning my 5th batch of biscuits and falling off Daisy for the 10th time. She smiled. I've learned a lot these past few weeks, not just about ranching and cooking, but about myself, about what I'm capable of when someone believes in me. Yates reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I do believe in you, more than you know. They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, their hands linked, the moment feeling more intimate than any kiss. Rebecca thought about the young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 3 weeks ago, terrified and full of lies. That woman felt like a stranger now. In her place was someone stronger, more honest, more certain of what she wanted. And what she wanted was this. This man, this life, this chance to build something real and lasting. The wedding day arrived with clear skies and gentle winds. Rebecca wore a simple dress that Martha had helped her make from fabric Yates had bought in town. It was pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs, nothing fancy but clean and new and entirely hers. The ceremony was held in the small church at the end of Belmont's Main Street, with the minister, Martha, Cal, and a handful of townspeople in attendance. Yates wore his best shirt and had shaved, looking almost uncomfortable in his formal attire but devastatingly handsome nonetheless. As they stood before the minister, speaking the vows that would bind them together, Rebecca felt a profound sense of rightness. When Yates slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hand was steady and sure. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates leaned down to kiss her gently, chastely, but with a tenderness that made her eyes prick with tears. They held a small celebration at Martha's boarding house afterward, with cake and coffee and well wishes from the townspeople who had come to meet Yates's new bride. Dutch Vernon did not attend, which everyone seemed to consider a blessing. It was late afternoon when they finally headed back to the ranch, newly married, the gold band on Rebecca's finger catching the sunlight. They rode side by side in the wagon, closer than they had on that first journey 3 weeks ago, their shoulders occasionally brushing. Nervous? Yates asked as the ranch came into view. A little, Rebecca admitted. Are you? More than a little. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house but made no move to get down. Rebecca, I want you to know something. Just because we're married now doesn't mean I expect anything you're not ready to give. We can take this slow, figure things out together. Her heart swelled with affection for this careful, considerate man. Thank you, but Yates, I'm not made of glass. I won't break. I know. I just want to do right by you. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble along his jaw, the warmth of his skin. You already are. He turned his head and kissed her palm, a gesture so tender it stole her breath. Then he climbed down and came around to help her from the wagon, but instead of setting her on her feet, he lifted her in his arms. What are you doing? She asked, laughing. Carrying my bride across the threshold. It's tradition. He grinned at her, and she wrapped her arms around his neck as he carried her up the porch steps and into the house. Inside, everything was as they'd left it that morning, but it felt different now. This was their home, not just his ranch that she was visiting. This was where they would build their life together. Yates set her down gently, his hands lingering at her waist. They stood close, looking at each other, the weight of the moment settling around them. Then he leaned down and kissed her properly. Not the chaste peck from the ceremony, but a real kiss, deep and searching and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rebecca felt like her entire body was on fire. Yates rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for days, he admitted. Then why didn't you? Didn't want to presume. Didn't want you to think I was only interested in that. And now, she looked up at him through her lashes. Now I'm hoping my wife might be interested in going to bed early tonight. The way he said, my wife, sent shivers down her spine. I think that could be arranged. He kissed her again, more urgently this time, and she responded with equal fervor, all the attraction and affection she'd been holding back pouring out. When he lifted her in his arms again and carried her toward his bedroom, their bedroom, she didn't protest. That night, they came together with a mixture of tenderness and passion that surprised them both. Yates was gentle but not tentative, taking his time to learn what pleased her, to make sure she felt safe and cherished. Rebecca discovered a boldness she hadn't known she possessed, exploring this new intimacy without shame or fear. Afterward, lying in Yates's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to its normal rhythm, Rebecca felt a contentment she had never experienced before. This was what home felt like, not a place but a person. Safety not as the absence of danger but as the presence of someone who would face danger with you. No regrets? Yates asked softly, his hand stroking her hair. None. You? None. They fell asleep tangled together. And for the first time since arriving in Wyoming Territory, Rebecca didn't have nightmares about the factory foreman or her mother's death, or the uncertain future. She simply slept, deeply and peacefully, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm, this one more intimate and comfortable than before. Rebecca continued to improve her skills, her biscuits finally reaching the point where they were actually edible without drowning them in gravy. Her riding improved to where she could help move cattle from one pasture to another, though Yates never let her go out alone, always keeping her close and protected. The situation with Vernon continued to simmer. More fires were started, though they managed to contain them before they caused serious damage. Cattle went missing from several smaller ranches. Tensions in town grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Then one morning in early autumn, Cal came rushing to the house before dawn, his face grave. "Vernon's made his move. He's filed a claim saying our north pasture is actually on his land. Says he's got a survey from '76 that proves it. He's bringing the territorial judge out tomorrow to settle it." Yates's expression turned to stone. "That survey is falsified. The north pasture has been part of this ranch since my father bought it in '68. You have proof of that, my mother's land deed. It's in the lockbox in the bedroom." They spent the day gathering documentation, preparing for the judge's visit. Rebecca helped search through old papers and documents, her seamstress's attention to detail proving useful as she organized everything by date and relevance. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Yates was quiet and tense. Rebecca came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his back. "We'll figure this out," she said. "We have the proof we need. Vernon has money and influence. Sometimes that matters more than proof. Then we'll fight harder, together." She turned him to face her. "You told me fear ends the moment you trust. I trusted you. Now you need to trust us. Trust that we're strong enough together to face whatever comes." He pulled her close, holding her tightly. "How did I get so lucky, the same way I did?" "We both took a chance on each other." The next day, the territorial judge arrived with Dutch Vernon and his lawyer. Judge Harrison was an older man with a reputation for fairness, which gave them hope. They all gathered in the ranch house's main room, papers spread across the table. Vernon's lawyer presented the survey first, a document that clearly showed the north pasture falling within Vernon's property boundaries. But when Yates presented his mother's original land deed, purchased 12 years before the survey was supposedly conducted, the judge's expression grew thoughtful. "This deed predates your survey by 8 years, Mr. Vernon," Judge Harrison said. "The survey corrects earlier errors," Vernon said smoothly. "The original boundaries were incorrectly marked." "Do you have documentation of these errors?" Vernon's lawyer shuffled papers, but couldn't produce anything convincing. Meanwhile, Yates laid out additional documents, including tax records showing continuous payment on the north pasture, correspondence with the Territorial Land Office, and witness statements from longtime residents confirming the boundaries. Rebecca watched Vernon's face grow redder as the evidence mounted against him. Finally, Judge Harrison made his ruling. "Based on the documentation presented, I find that the north pasture belongs to Mr. Emerson, as established by the original land deed. The survey presented by Mr. Vernon appears to be either in error or deliberately falsified. If it's the latter, that's a serious crime that I'll be investigating further." Vernon stood abruptly. "This isn't over, Emerson." "I think it is," Yates said calmly. "And if you come after my land again, I'll file charges for harassment and attempted theft. You might have influence, Dutch, but you don't have enough to overcome clear evidence of fraud." Vernon stormed out, his lawyer scrambling to follow. Judge Harrison stayed long enough to file the official documents confirming Yates's ownership, then departed with a warning for Yates to report any further trouble immediately. After they left, the tension that had been building for weeks finally broke. Cal let out a whoop of celebration, and even Yates allowed himself a broad smile. Rebecca found herself swept up in his arms, spun around in a circle while she laughed with relief and joy. "We did it," she said when he finally set her down. "We actually did it." "You did it," Yates corrected. "You organized all those documents, made everything clear and easy to present. The judge could see immediately that we had the stronger case." "I just put papers in order. You're the one who stood up to Vernon." "We did it together," Cal interjected. "That's what matters. You two make a good team." That night, they celebrated with a dinner that Rebecca had actually cooked entirely herself. A beef roast with vegetables that turned out better than she'd hoped. As they ate, Yates told stories about his mother, how she'd fought to keep the ranch going after his father drank away most of their money, how she'd always believed the land would provide if they respected it and worked hard. "She would have liked you," he said to Rebecca. "She always said I needed someone with sense and backbone. You've got both in spades. I wish I could have met her." "So do I." He reached across the table and took her hand. "But I think she'd be happy knowing the ranch is in good hands, our hands." Winter came early that year, snow falling in October and blanketing the prairie in white. The ranch work changed with the seasons, focused now on keeping the cattle fed and healthy, maintaining equipment, and preparing for the long cold months ahead. Rebecca discovered she loved winter evenings when the work was done and she and Yates could sit by the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's company. He taught her to play chess, and she taught him some of the songs her mother used to sing. They learned each other's histories, all the small details that made them who they were. On Christmas Eve, Yates surprised her with a gift, a beautifully tooled leather journal. "For your recipes and notes," he explained, "so you can record everything you've learned." She gave him a new shirt she'd sewn herself, the stitching careful and even the fit perfect because she'd measured one of his old shirts as a pattern. The way his face lit up when he tried it on made all the hours of work worthwhile. "It's perfect," he said. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me a reason to learn how to make shirts." She smiled at him across the firelight. "Thank you for everything, actually, for giving me a chance, for being patient with me, for making me feel like I belong here." "You do belong here. I can't imagine this place without you anymore." He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "I love you, Rebecca. I probably have for weeks, but I wasn't sure if it was too soon to say it." Tears pricked her eyes. "I love you too, so much it sometimes scares me." "No more fear," he reminded her gently. "We trust each other, remember?" "No more fear," she agreed and kissed him. The winter passed, cold and sometimes harsh, but they were warm and content inside their small home. Rebecca's skills continued to improve until she could cook full meals without disaster, care for the animals confidently, and even help Cal with basic veterinary care when needed. Spring arrived with melting snow and new calves, and with it, new life in another form. Rebecca began to suspect she was pregnant when she couldn't stomach coffee anymore and felt tired all the time. When she missed her monthly courses twice in a row, she knew for certain. She told Yates one evening in late March after supper, when they were sitting on the porch watching the last of the snow melt from the distant mountains. She'd been nervous about how he'd react, wondering if it was too soon, if he was ready for a child. "I have something to tell you," she began, and he immediately turned to her with concern in his eyes. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, at least I don't think so." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." The expression that crossed his face was pure wonder, followed by joy so bright it was almost blinding. "Really? You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. I'll see the doctor in town to confirm, but all the signs are there." He pulled her into his arms, careful and gentle, as if she'd suddenly become fragile. "A baby. We're going to have a baby." He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you happy about it?" "Yes," she said honestly. "Terrified but happy are you, more than I can say." His hand moved to her stomach, which wasn't showing yet but held their child. "My mother would have been over the moon, a grandchild to carry on the dream. Then we'll make sure this child knows about their grandmother, about how strong she was and how much she loved this place." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Rebecca spent the first few months fighting nausea. Martha came out regularly to check on her, bringing supplies and advice from her years of helping women through childbirth. Cal was pleased in his gruff way, already planning modifications to the house to add another bedroom. Yates was attentive to the point of being overprotective, barely letting Rebecca lift anything heavier than a coffee cup. She had to finally put her foot down when he tried to insist she shouldn't ride Daisy anymore. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said firmly. "The doctor said gentle riding is fine. I'm not giving up everything I've learned just because I'm carrying a baby. I just want you safe, both of you." "We are safe, but I need to stay active and useful. I'll go crazy if you make me sit around doing nothing." They compromised, Rebecca continuing her ranch work but with Yates or Cal always nearby. It was frustrating sometimes but also touching, seeing how much he cared. Summer brought its own challenges. The heat made Rebecca uncomfortable, and she couldn't move as easily as before, her belly growing round and prominent. But there was also joy in feeling the baby move, in watching Yates's face light up every time he felt a kick against his hand. In August, Martha moved into the ranch house to help as Rebecca's time drew near. The labor started on a hot afternoon, Rebecca's water breaking while she was hanging laundry. Martha immediately took charge, sending Yates to fetch the doctor while she got Rebecca comfortable. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Rebecca understood now why women feared childbirth, the pain beyond anything she'd imagined. But Martha stayed with her the whole time, coaching her through each contraction, and when the doctor finally arrived, his calm presence helped. Yates was banned from the bedroom during the actual birth, a convention Rebecca was too exhausted to argue against. But the moment their son was born, screaming and red-faced and perfect, Martha cleaned him quickly and placed him in Rebecca's arms, then called for Yates. The look on his face when he saw his son for the first time was something Rebecca would remember forever. Wonder and love and a fierce protectiveness all mixed together. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his finger gently stroking the baby's tiny hand. "He's beautiful," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're both beautiful. You're amazing." "We should name him after your mother," Rebecca said. "Sarah's father, what was his name?" James Carter he was called." "Then James Emerson," Rebecca decided. "James Carter Emerson, so he carries both families forward." Yates leaned down and kissed her forehead, then placed the gentlest kiss on their son's head. "Perfect. It's perfect." The weeks after James's birth were exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Rebecca learned to feed him, change him, soothe him when he cried, all while recovering from the birth herself. Yates was surprisingly natural with the baby, confidently holding him and walking him around the house when Rebecca needed rest. "How are you so good at this?" she asked one night, watching him rock James to sleep with practiced ease. "Helped raise several of the neighbor kids when I was younger. My mother would take in children whose parents were struggling, help them until they got back on their feet. I learned early how to hold a baby." It was another piece of his history, another glimpse into the man his mother had shaped him to be. Rebecca fell in love with him more deeply every day. As James grew from newborn to infant, the ranch continued its rhythms. Cal had hired 2 new hands, young men eager to learn ranching, which took some of the burden off Yates. The cattle herd had grown, and they were making enough profit to start planning improvements to the ranch. One evening in late autumn, when James was nearly 3 months old, Rebecca and Yates sat on the porch watching the sunset while their son slept in his cradle nearby. The air was crisp with the promise of coming winter, and the mountains were already snow-capped. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked suddenly. Answering that advertisement, coming out here, Rebecca turned to look at him, this man who had become her whole world. Not for a single moment. "Do you regret placing the ad, 'Best decision I ever made'?" He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become second nature. "I was so lonely before you came. I didn't even realize how lonely until you were here, and suddenly the house felt alive again." "I was terrified when I got off that stagecoach," Rebecca admitted. "So scared you'd see right through me, see all my lies, and send me away. I'm glad you told me the truth. That took real courage. You made it easy to be honest. You didn't judge me for being desperate or afraid." "We were both desperate in our own ways, both afraid of different things." He squeezed her hand. "But you were right that night when you said fear ends when you trust. I trust you with everything, Rebecca. My heart, my home, my son, everything that matters. And I trust you the same way." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We've built something good here, haven't we? We've built something amazing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Inside the house, James made a small sound but settled back into sleep. The cattle lowed in the distance, and somewhere a coyote called to its mate. This was home. Not the building or the land, though those mattered, but this moment of peace and contentment with the people she loved. Rebecca thought back to that frightened young woman who had stepped off the stage-coach more than a year ago, the one who had lied because she was desperate and alone. That woman felt like a stranger now. In her place was someone stronger, more capable, more certain of her place in the world. A wife, a mother, a ranch woman who could milk cows and cook for a crew and ride across the prairie without falling off. Someone who had learned that fear didn't have to be permanent, that trust could be earned and given, that love could grow in the most unexpected places. "Tell me what you're thinking," Yates said softly. "I'm thinking about how much has changed, how much I've changed." "You haven't changed. You've just become more yourself. The real you was always there, just waiting for a safe place to emerge." She lifted her head to look at him. "You gave me that safe place." "We gave it to each other," he corrected and kissed her. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were harsh winters and dry summers, cattle that got sick and crops that failed. Dutch Vernon caused trouble periodically until he finally sold his ranch and moved to California, much to everyone's relief. Rebecca had 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah after Yates's mother, and then another son they named Thomas. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. They added onto the house, built a larger barn, increased their herd. James grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, already learning the work of ranching. Sarah was quieter, thoughtful, with her grandmother's determination and her mother's attention to detail. Thomas was still a baby but showed signs of being the wildest of the 3, into everything and afraid of nothing through it all. Rebecca and Yates remained partners in every sense of the word. They worked side by side, raised their children together, weathered storms both literal and figurative. The love between them deepened with each passing year, rooted not in grand gestures but in daily choice to support and cherish each other. On their 10th anniversary, Yates took Rebecca back to the spot where he had first taught her to ride Daisy. The old mare was retired now, living out her days in peaceful grazing, but the corral remained. They stood there together, watching their children play in the yard, the ranch bustling with life and activity. 10 years, Rebecca marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday I stepped off that stagecoach. Other times it feels like I've always been here. You have always been here in a way. This place needed you. I needed you." Yates wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against his chest. "I used to wonder if my mother's dream would die with her, but you helped keep it alive. More than that, you helped it grow into something bigger and better than she probably imagined. We did it together. That's what partnership means. I love you, Rebecca Emerson. More now than I did when we married, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you too. Thank you for being patient with me, for giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one, for teaching me what love really means. You deserved every chance and more. You just needed someone to believe in you." They kissed there in the fading afternoon light, surrounded by everything they had built together. The ranch stretched out around them, no longer just Yates's inheritance, but their shared legacy, something they would pass to their children and grandchildren. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table with the journal Yates had given her years ago. It was nearly full now, filled with recipes and notes, observations about the ranch and the seasons, small moments she wanted to remember. She turned to a fresh page and began to write, recording the day's anniversary celebration, the feeling of contentment that filled her. As she wrote, she thought about that frightened young woman who had confessed her fears to a stranger. The cowboy who had promised her that fear would end the moment she trusted him. He had been right. The fear hadn't disappeared overnight, but gradually, as trust grew between them, it had faded to nothing. In its place was something infinitely better, a confidence born of knowing she was loved and valued, that she had a place in the world and people who depended on her. Yates came into the kitchen and looked over her shoulder at the journal. "Writing our story, part of it. There's too much to fit in one book. We'll need many volumes. Then we better make sure it's a story worth telling." He kissed the top of her head. "Come to bed. Tomorrow starts early." Rebecca closed the journal and stood, taking his hand. They walked together toward their bedroom, past the rooms where their children slept, through the house that had become a home filled with laughter and love. Outside, the Wyoming night was clear and cold, stars blazing across the sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet. The ranch was quiet except for the occasional sound of cattle settling in for the night. Everything was peaceful, secure, exactly as it should be. As Rebecca lay in her husband's arms that night, listening to his breathing slow into sleep, she felt profound gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought her here, for the desperate gamble of answering an advertisement, for the courage to confess her lies, for the trust that had grown between them, for every moment, good and bad, that had led to this life. She had come west looking for survival and found something infinitely more precious. She had found home. She had found love. She had found herself. And that, she thought as sleep claimed her, was the greatest gift of all. Not the ranch or the children or even the man beside her, precious as they all were, but the gift of becoming fully herself, of learning to trust and be trusted, of building something lasting and true. Fear had ended the moment she trusted him, but love had begun the moment he trusted her back. And that love would endure, she knew with absolute certainty, for all the years to come. Through whatever challenges and joys the future held, they would face it together, partners in every sense, their bond forged in honesty and strengthened by choice. The mail-order bride who had arrived in Belmont, Wyoming Territory so many years ago was gone, replaced by a woman who belonged to this land and this life as surely as the mountains belonged to the sky. Rebecca Emerson, ranchwoman, wife, mother, home at last. And in the morning, when the rooster crowed and the sun rose over the mountains, she would wake beside her husband and begin another day of the life they had built together. Another day of the story that was still being written, page by page, moment by moment. A story that had begun with fear and confession, but had bloomed into something beautiful and enduring. A love story, yes, but more than that. A story of transformation, of finding courage in unexpected places, of two people who had taken a chance on each other and created something that would last for generations. That was the legacy they would leave. Not just the ranch or the land, but the proof that trust and love could overcome any obstacle, that even the most frightened person could find strength. That partnership meant standing together, not just in the easy moments but especially in the hard ones. As Rebecca drifted into sleep, her last thought was simple but profound. She was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with. And tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after, would bring new joys and new challenges to face together. The Wild West night settled over the Emerson ranch, peaceful and complete. Inside the house, a family slept, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and safe. And outside, under the vast Wyoming sky, the land waited patiently for morning, for the continuation of the story being written in the lives of the people who called it home. Home, family, love, trust, these were the things that mattered. These were the things that endured. And these were the things that Rebecca and Yates had built together, brick by brick, day by day. From the moment a frightened young woman confessed her fears and a steady cowboy promised her that trust would banish them, he had kept that promise. She had learned to trust. And together, they had created something worth far more than either of them had imagined possible. A life, a love, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone, carried forward by their children and their children's children, all of them benefiting from the courage of two people who had dared to take a chance on each other. And if someone had asked Rebecca, in those final moments before sleep claimed her completely, if she had any regrets about answering that advertisement, about taking that terrifying leap into the unknown, she would have answered without hesitation. Not one single regret. Not one single moment she would change, because every moment, good and bad, had led her here. To this man, this life, this love, and that was worth everything. Worth every fear she had faced, every challenge she had overcome, every tear she had shed. She was home. She was loved. She was exactly where she belonged, and that was more than enough. That was everything.